She was a gardener with dirt beneath her nails. He was a lord with everything but honour. To win a cruel bet, he gave her gowns, lessons and lies. But what he didn't expect was to fall in love with the woman he planned to deceive. She thought it was kindness. He thought it was just a game. But when the truth came out, only one of them walked away with dignity. The morning mist clung to the rose garden at Worthington Manor like a secret waiting to be discovered. Eleanor Hartwell knelt among the flower beds, her worn brown dress blending with the earth as she whispered to her most precious creation. "There now, my beauty," she murmured to a climbing rose unlike any other in England. Deep crimson petals edged with gold caught the early light, a hybrid she had bred herself over 3 careful years. Father always said every living thing deserves a chance to bloom. She had named it Eleanor's Grace, though no one knew of its existence save herself. Hidden behind the greenhouse where only she worked, it represented everything her father had taught her about patience, hope, and creating beauty from nothing. The other gardeners thought it was merely another climbing rose, but Eleanor knew better. This was her legacy, proof that a vicar's daughter could create something immortal. Her father was gone now, dead these 6 months past, leaving Eleanor with nothing but her education and this secret rose. Mrs. Henderson, her father's cousin, had been kind enough to secure her this position as assistant gardener, a fall from grace that would have scandalised the parish ladies who once called her Dear Miss Hartwell. Eleanor made careful notes in her small journal about all the roses, but she devoted special pages to her hybrid. Each bloom was documented, each new growth celebrated in private. The rose was thriving, preparing for what would be its most spectacular display yet. Lost in her work, she failed to notice the 2 figures who appeared at the drawing room window high above, one nursing wounded pride, the other plotting cruel amusement. Inside that window, a conversation was taking place that would change her life forever. But Eleanor, absorbed in tending her secret masterpiece, remained blissfully unaware as destiny took shape in the form of a gentleman's wager. Her rose would bloom magnificently this season. Whether Eleanor herself would survive what was coming remained to be seen. Lord Sebastian Ashworth stood at his drawing-room window, the bitter taste of last night's humiliation still sharp in his mouth. Miss Charlotte Pemberton's rejection had been public, brutal, and witnessed by half of London society. "Good God, Ashworth, you look like death," announced James Fitzwilliam, strolling into the room with characteristic cheerfulness, rather like a man who's been trampled by his own horse. Sebastian didn't turn from the window. "Your sympathy is overwhelming. Come now, one rejection hardly signals the apocalypse. Though I must say, Miss Pemberton's declaration that she'd rather marry a chimney sweep than a man of such insufferable arrogance was deliciously pointed. I have the words memorised, thank you." James studied his friend with calculating eyes. "You know what your problem is? You've grown too comfortable, too assured of your own appeal. When did you last have to actually work for a lady's affections?" Sebastian's jaw tightened. As the Earl of Worthington, blessed with fortune and what his mirror confirmed to be handsome features, conquest had always come easily. "Perhaps," he admitted grudgingly. "What you need is a challenge, something to restore your confidence." James's eyes gleamed with mischief as he moved to the window. "I propose a wager. Your wagers always end in disaster. This one is different. See that girl there tending the roses?" James pointed to the slight figure in brown. "Miss Eleanor Hartwell, your new gardener, plain little thing from Yorkshire." Sebastian glanced down dismissively. "What of her?" "I wager you cannot make her fall in love with you." Sebastian snorted. "That seems beneath even your standards of cruelty." "Ah, but here's the interesting part. You must also transform her completely. Make her into a lady who could grace any London ballroom. Present her at your midsummer ball in 6 weeks as a woman worthy of any gentleman's attention." Despite himself, Sebastian felt intrigued. The stakes. Success pays all your gambling debts from last season. Failure costs you £1,000 to the church and a public admission that your legendary charm is greatly exaggerated. Sebastian looked again at the figure below. From this distance she appeared unremarkable, a servant absorbed in her work. yet something in her careful movements suggested intelligence. 6 weeks to transform a country mouse into a society beauty? Sebastian extended his hand. Done. They shook hands, sealing Eleanor's fate without her knowledge or consent. But 6 weeks is plenty of time, for regret, and Eleanor Hartwell was no one's experiment. 3 days later, Sebastian found Eleanor in his library, surrounded by botanical texts that would challenge most university students. She rose quickly when he entered, offering a proper curtsy. "My lord, I hope I'm not presuming." "Not at all. I'm pleased to see the books put to good use." He moved closer, genuinely surprised by the advanced nature of her reading. "Formal training in botany?" A slight flush coloured her pale cheeks. "Nothing formal, my lord. My father encouraged my education. He believed knowledge was a gift that circumstances could never steal." The past tense didn't escape him. "Your father?" "He died last spring. He was vicar of a small Yorkshire parish." Her chin lifted with quiet dignity. "The living went to a married man. Mrs. Henderson was kind enough to secure this position for me." Sebastian felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. To fall from respectability to service must have been devastating, yet she bore it with remarkable grace. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. She looked up with surprise, as if kindness from her employer was unexpected. "Thank you, my lord." For several moments they sat in comfortable silence, Eleanor returning to her reading while Sebastian pretended to examine poetry. In truth, he was studying her, noting the intelligence in her dark eyes, the natural grace in her movements. The way escaped tendrils of hair softened her severe appearance. James had been wrong about one thing. Eleanor Hartwell wasn't plain, she was simply unpolished. "Miss Hartwell," he said finally, "I could use your expertise. I'm planning a garden party, and I'd like the roses at their absolute finest. Perhaps you could show me your plans tomorrow morning?" Her face lit with genuine enthusiasm, the first truly animated expression he'd seen. "I should be delighted, my lord. The hybrid teas should be perfect by then, and I have several ideas for improvements." As she spoke passionately about soil amendments and pruning techniques, Sebastian found himself genuinely interested. The transformation from quiet servant to passionate expert was remarkable. What had begun as a calculated seduction was already becoming something more complex. Eleanor Hartwell possessed qualities that many society ladies lacked: intelligence, genuine kindness, and an innate dignity that no amount of training could create. The question was, what exactly was he going to do about it? Their morning garden walk proceeded exactly as Sebastian had planned, an opportunity to study his subject and begin the delicate work of winning her trust. He watched Eleanor move among the roses with practiced efficiency, noting details that might prove useful in his campaign. "This Caroline de Saint-Sal needs more sun," she explained, stopping before a struggling climber. "If we moved her to the south wall and planted Madame Hardy here instead, the colour combination would be stunning." Sebastian nodded thoughtfully, though his interest was more in her animated expression than in horticultural advice. When Eleanor spoke about her work, she transformed. Her posture straightened, her eyes sparkled, her whole being seemed to come alive. It was exactly the sort of passion that could be redirected toward other subjects, or other people. As they walked, Eleanor paused before a secluded corner behind the greenhouse, where a magnificent climbing rose bloomed in splendid isolation. Its deep crimson petals, edged with gold, were unlike anything Sebastian had seen. "What variety is this?" he asked, genuinely curious. Eleanor's cheeks coloured slightly. It's something I've been working on. A hybrid, nothing important." Sebastian studied the extraordinary bloom more closely. "Nothing important. This is remarkable. I've never seen anything like it." "My father taught me about crossbreeding," Eleanor said quietly. "He believed in creating beauty that would outlast us." Sebastian felt a strange tightness in his chest at her words, though he pushed the feeling aside. "What do you call it?" Eleanor hesitated. "Eleanor's grace," she whispered, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I know it's presumptuous." "It's perfect. Sebastian said, and was surprised to find he meant it. As they continued their tour, Sebastian found himself thinking about the hidden rose and the quiet pride in Eleanor's voice when she spoke of it. For a moment, his carefully planned seduction felt less like strategy and more like something else entirely. "Your father taught you well," he observed, pushing away the uncomfortable thought. Her expression grew wistful. "He believed God's creation should be understood, not merely admired. He taught me to observe carefully and think critically." "What else did he teach you?" Sebastian asked, though he already knew the answer from his inquiries among the staff. "The usual accomplishments expected of a vicar's daughter," she replied, then seemed to catch herself. "Reading, writing, French, piano." Sebastian feigned surprise. "You play piano?" Eleanor's cheeks coloured with what appeared to be embarrassment. "Not well, and it's been months since I've had access to an instrument." "There's an excellent piano in the music room that sees little use," Sebastian said with calculated generosity. "You're welcome to practice there." Eleanor stopped walking, staring at him with obvious amazement. "My lord, that's very kind, but surely—" "You're a gentlewoman by birth who has faced difficult circumstances," Sebastian interrupted, pleased with how noble he sounded. "There's no shame in maintaining your accomplishments." For a moment, Eleanor seemed speechless, exactly the reaction he had hoped for. When she found her voice, it was soft with gratitude. "You're very good to me, my lord. I wonder why." The direct question caught Sebastian slightly off guard, though he had prepared for it. "Perhaps because I've recently learned that I often overlook people of genuine worth," he said, delivering the line he had rehearsed. Something flickered in Eleanor's expression. Was it confusion? Suspicion? Sebastian couldn't be sure, but he noticed she stepped back slightly, creating distance between them. "My lord," she said carefully, "I should return to my duties." "Of course," Sebastian agreed, though he made a mental note of her retreat. Was she more perceptive than he had anticipated? As Sebastian watched her walk toward the house, he felt satisfied with the morning's work. He had planted the seeds of gratitude and confusion that would make her more susceptible to his eventual courtship. The slight wariness in her manner was unfortunate, but not unexpected. Servants learned to be cautious around their betters. Still, the image of Eleanor's grace lingered in his mind, along with the quiet pride in Eleanor's voice when she spoke of creating something beautiful that would outlast her. Over the next week, Sebastian made a point of seeking out Eleanor's company, though their interactions felt stilted and strange. He found himself struggling to strike the right tone, friendly enough to encourage her, but not so familiar as to seem improper. Eleanor, for her part, seemed increasingly puzzled by his attention. "Miss Hartwell," he said one afternoon, finding her in the library with her botanical texts, "I find myself in need of advice." Eleanor looked up with polite attention, though Sebastian caught a flicker of wariness in her dark eyes. "Of course, my lord. How may I assist you?" Sebastian had rehearsed this conversation but now found himself oddly tongue-tied. "I've been thinking about social dynamics, the way people interact in society. You've made some interesting observations about such matters." Eleanor's brow furrowed slightly. "I'm not certain what observations you mean, my lord." "About society judging by appearances rather than character," Sebastian pressed on, feeling increasingly awkward. "I wondered, that is, I thought perhaps—" He trailed off, realizing how ridiculous he sounded. Eleanor waited with patient confusion, clearly having no idea where this conversation was leading. "Never mind," Sebastian said finally. "It was merely an idle thought." "Very well, my lord," Eleanor replied, though her expression suggested she found the entire exchange very odd indeed. It was during a walk by the ornamental lake several days later that Sebastian finally managed to broach his carefully planned proposition, though even then it felt forced and unnatural. "Miss Hartwell," he began, "you mentioned missing the social aspects of your former life." Eleanor nodded cautiously. "I did. I'm hosting a garden party in several weeks, a grand affair with guests from London. I wonder if you might consider attending as a guest rather than in your current capacity." Eleanor's eyebrows rose in shock. My lord, that would hardly be appropriate. What if you weren't a servant at all? Sebastian interrupted, delivering his rehearsed pitch. What if you were a distant connection visiting from Yorkshire? The daughter of a clergyman staying with me for the summer. Eleanor stared at him in complete amazement. You cannot be serious. Entirely serious, Sebastian replied, though he could hear how artificial his enthusiasm sounded. With some adjustments to your wardrobe and coaching in current social conventions, you could take your place among my guests without anyone suspecting your true circumstances. Eleanor walked to the water's edge, her expression deeply troubled. When she turned back to face him, her confusion was evident. My lord, I must ask, what purpose would such deception serve? And why would you make such an extraordinary offer to someone you barely know? Sebastian felt heat rise in his cheeks. His prepared explanations suddenly seemed thin and unconvincing. Call it a social experiment, he said weakly. You've made astute observations about society judging by appearance rather than character. This would test that theory. Eleanor studied his face with an intensity that made him deeply uncomfortable. But why me? Why take such a risk for someone in my position? And Sebastian struggled for an answer that wouldn't reveal his true motives. Because you possess qualities that deserve recognition. Even to his own ears, it sounded like a question rather than a statement. Eleanor continued to watch him with those perceptive, dark eyes, and Sebastian had the unsettling feeling that she could see straight through his carefully constructed rationale. I need time to consider this, Eleanor said finally. It's a very unusual request. Of course, Sebastian replied, relief flooding through him. Take all the time you need. As they walked back toward the house in uncomfortable silence, Sebastian wondered why what should have been a straightforward seduction felt so awkward and complicated. Eleanor's obvious confusion about his motives made him acutely aware of how thin his explanations sounded. More troubling still was the way she looked at him, not with the gratitude and growing affection he had expected, but with a wariness that suggested she sensed something amiss in his sudden interest. 2 days later, Eleanor surprised Sebastian by accepting his proposition, though her manner remained cautious and somewhat puzzled. I've considered your offer, my lord, she said when she found him in the morning room. I confess I don't fully understand your motivations, but I should like to try. Sebastian felt a surge of triumph that was immediately complicated by the uncertainty in her voice. Excellent. I've already arranged for London's finest dressmaker to attend you. That's very generous, Eleanor replied, though something in her tone suggested she found his enthusiasm strange. London's finest dressmaker arrived the next morning with her entourage, circling Eleanor with a critical eye that made Sebastian bristle unexpectedly on her behalf. The bone structure is excellent, Madame Dubois pronounced. The colouring quite striking when properly presented. Yes, I can work with this. Sebastian watched as Eleanor stood perfectly still during the examination, but he caught the flash of hurt in her dark eyes at being discussed like livestock. For the first time since beginning this enterprise, he felt genuinely uncomfortable with the process. I was thinking blue for the evening gown, Sebastian suggested, surprised by his own desire to give Eleanor some say in her transformation. Madame Dubois waved dismissively. Too safe. This one needs sophistication. Deep emerald, perhaps. Something to make gentlemen take notice. Eleanor's cheeks coloured, but before Sebastian could speak, she intervened herself. Madame Dubois, she said with quiet dignity that made Sebastian's chest tighten strangely. I appreciate your expertise, but I'd prefer you address your observations to me rather than discussing me as if I weren't present. The dressmaker's eyebrows rose, clearly surprised by Eleanor's firm tone, but she inclined her head respectfully. Pardonnez-moi, mademoiselle. You are quite right. Sebastian found himself watching Eleanor with new eyes as she navigated the fitting with perfect composure, answering questions with grace, and expressing preferences with quiet confidence. There was something remarkable about her ability to maintain dignity even in circumstances designed to diminish her. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Sebastian, James Fitzwilliam had been observing the proceedings from the hallway. When he caught sight of Eleanor in her partially fitted gown, his eyebrows rose with genuine surprise. I say, he murmured to himself. Ashworth wasn't exaggerating about the potential. After the dressmaker departed, Sebastian found Eleanor staring thoughtfully out the window, and for the first time in days, he approached her without a calculated agenda. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked, genuinely curious about her answer. She turned with a slight smile that seemed more natural than any expression he'd seen from her lately. "I confess I'm nervous. It's been so long since I moved in such circles, and I was never entirely comfortable even then." "What troubles you most?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh her words. "The pretense, I suppose. I've always prided myself on honesty, and this feels dishonest," Sebastian supplied, feeling an unexpected stab of conscience. Necessary, perhaps, but uncomfortable, nonetheless. She looked at him directly. "I still don't entirely understand why you're doing this for me, my lord. Your explanations, while kind, seem inadequate." Sebastian found himself completing her thoughts again, disturbed by how transparent his motives apparently were to her. Eleanor nodded. "I don't wish to seem ungrateful, but your sudden interest in my welfare is rather puzzling." Sebastian felt heat rise in his cheeks. Under her direct gaze, his carefully prepared justifications crumbled. "Perhaps my motives are not entirely selfless," he admitted, though he couldn't bring himself to reveal the full truth. "I suspected as much," Eleanor said quietly. I hope they're not entirely selfish either." The comment hit home with uncomfortable accuracy. Sebastian found himself really looking at Eleanor for the first time, not as a project or a means to an end, but as a person whose feelings and dignity mattered. The realization was unsettling. "No," he said slowly, surprising himself with the honesty in his voice. "Not entirely selfish." Something shifted in Eleanor's expression, a tentative warmth that hadn't been there before. "Then perhaps we can make this arrangement work for both our benefits." "Perhaps we can," Sebastian agreed, though he was no longer entirely certain what benefits he was hoping to achieve. That afternoon, Sebastian found himself genuinely looking forward to their first coaching session, though for reasons he couldn't quite articulate. When Eleanor appeared in the library, having changed into her best dress and arranged her hair more becomingly, Sebastian felt something stir in his chest that had nothing to do with his wager with Fitzwilliam. "The key," Sebastian explained as they began their lessons, "is expressing interest without revealing too much of your own opinions too quickly." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That seems rather calculated." "All social interaction is calculated to some degree," Sebastian replied. "The art lies in making it appear natural." "And if one's opinions are particularly strong," Eleanor challenged, "must they be suppressed entirely for the sake of agreeability?" Sebastian found himself pausing, really considering her question instead of giving the rote answer he had prepared. With Eleanor watching him expectantly, he realized he was tired of calculated responses. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "there's more value in honest conversation than I've previously believed." Eleanor's smile was radiant. "Then perhaps this experiment will be educational for both of us." For the first time since accepting Fitzwilliam's wager, Sebastian wondered what exactly he was getting himself into. And more troubling still, whether he was prepared for what Eleanor Hartwell might teach him about himself. When Eleanor emerged in the finished emerald gown, Sebastian's breath caught in his throat. Madame Dubois had indeed worked magic. The silk fit perfectly, transforming Eleanor into a vision of elegant beauty that made his pulse quicken in ways he hadn't anticipated. "Magnifique," the dressmaker murmured with satisfaction. "You see how the proper presentation transforms?" Eleanor turned slowly before the mirror, wonder in her dark eyes. She had forgotten how it felt to wear such beautiful clothing, to move with the confidence that came from knowing she looked her best. "What do you think?" she asked Sebastian. "Will I pass muster?" Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, drinking in the sight of her. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "You look extraordinary, Miss Hartwell." Eleanor's cheeks warmed with pleasure. "You don't think it too grand?" "I think you could hold your own in any drawing room in London." After Madame Dubois departed, Eleanor found herself alone with Sebastian, catching sight of her reflection again with amazement. "I feel rather like I'm playing dress-up," she confessed. "You look perfectly natural," Sebastian assured her, "as if you were born to wear such things." Eleanor turned from the mirror to face him. "But was I? Sometimes I wonder if this isn't all elaborate pretense, if I'm not simply pretending to be something I no longer am." Sebastian moved closer. "What do you mean?" "This woman in the mirror looks like who I used to be, before Father died and everything changed. But I'm not that person anymore. I've worked with my hands, learned things about myself the pampered vicar's daughter never knew. Can I simply put on fine clothes and pretend those experiences never happened?" "Perhaps you needn't pretend they never happened," Sebastian said quietly, and realized he meant every word. "Perhaps they've made you someone more interesting than you were before." Eleanor looked at him with surprise. "More interesting? The woman I've come to know possesses qualities many ladies of fashion lack," Sebastian continued, his voice growing more earnest. "Resilience, genuine kindness, the ability to create something beautiful and lasting, like your rose." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at his words, and at the fact that he remembered her secret garden. "You're very kind to say so." "I'm not being kind," Sebastian replied, moving closer still. "I'm being honest." They stood facing each other in the golden light, Eleanor in her emerald silk, and Sebastian in his perfectly tailored coat. The space between them seemed charged with awareness. "Sebastian," Eleanor said softly, using his given name without thinking. His eyes darkened at the sound. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might say something more, might bridge the careful distance between them. But instead, he stepped back with visible effort. "Tomorrow will be a long day," he said, voice carefully controlled. Eleanor nodded, though she felt strangely bereft at his withdrawal. As he moved toward the door, she found herself calling after him. "Sebastian?" He turned back. "Yes." "Thank you. For all of this. Whatever your reasons, you've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" Eleanor looked once more at her reflection, seeing not just the elegant gown but the confidence in her posture, the light in her eyes. "The ability to see myself as more than my circumstances." Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. "I think you were always more than your circumstances, Eleanor. Perhaps you simply needed the right mirror to see it." After he left, Eleanor remained before the glass, thinking about his words and the expression she'd seen in his eyes. Something was shifting between them, something that went far beyond their original arrangement. Tomorrow night, she would step into Sebastian's world as his equal, but tonight she had a feeling that both their worlds were about to change forever. The evening of the garden party arrived with perfect weather, clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the perfume of Eleanor's beloved roses through the twilight air. Her secret rose, Eleanor's grace, bloomed magnificently in its hidden corner, more spectacular than ever before. Eleanor stood before her mirror in the emerald gown, transformed beyond recognition by skilled hands and expensive silk. When she entered the library where Sebastian waited, he went completely still. "Good Lord," he breathed. "Eleanor, you are absolutely stunning." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken at his obvious admiration. "You don't think it too much?" "I think," Sebastian said, offering his arm, "that I'll have to fight off every gentleman present to keep your attention for myself." The garden party was indeed magnificent, with 50 guests scattered across the candlelit terraces. Eleanor's roses provided a perfect backdrop, their colours glowing in the warm light. Sebastian's introduction of her proceeded smoothly. No one questioned her supposed background or showed suspicion about her circumstances. Indeed, she found herself the object of considerable interest, particularly among the gentlemen who seemed charmed by her combination of beauty and intelligence. "Miss Hartwell," said Lord Pemberton as they admired a climbing rose, "you seem remarkably knowledgeable about gardening. A particular interest?" Eleanor felt a moment of panic, realizing how easily she could betray herself, but recovered smoothly. I've always found great pleasure in understanding God's creation, my lord. My father encouraged such interests. How refreshing. So many young ladies today seem interested only in fashion and gossip. As the evening progressed, Eleanor caught sight of James Fitzwilliam watching her with undisguised admiration. When Sebastian was occupied with other guests, James approached her with obvious intent. "Miss Hartwell," he said with his most charming smile, "you are quite the revelation this evening. I confess I'm enchanted." Eleanor felt a flutter of unease at his intensity. "You're very kind, Mr. Fitzwilliam." "Not kind, honest. Tell me, what are your plans after your visit here? Surely a woman of your qualities has many options." Eleanor noticed Sebastian watching their interaction with a frown and excused herself politely. But James's attention had been marked, and Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she had just become the centre of a different kind of game entirely. Near sunset, as the party began to wind down, Eleanor stepped away to a secluded terrace to catch her breath. The success of the evening felt dreamlike. This morning she had been a servant. Tonight she was an equal among the finest society. "There you are," came Sebastian's voice behind her. "I wondered where you'd disappeared to." Eleanor turned to find him approaching with champagne, his face glowing with satisfaction, and something else she couldn't identify. "I needed a moment to process everything," she said, accepting the glass. "I can hardly believe how well it's gone." "You've been magnificent," Sebastian said, moving beside her at the terrace railing. "I've watched you charm every person you've spoken with. Not one suspects anything other than that you're exactly what you appear, a lady of quality and refinement." Eleanor sipped her champagne, bubbles dancing on her tongue. "It feels like a dream. This morning I was tending roses. Tonight I'm discussing poetry with Lord Pemberton." "And tomorrow?" Sebastian asked quietly. Eleanor looked at him with surprise. "Tomorrow I return to reality, I suppose. Back to my brown dresses and gardening gloves." Sebastian was quiet, his gaze fixed on the garden where the last guests were departing. "What if you didn't have to?" Eleanor's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" Sebastian turned to face her fully, his expression serious and intent. "What if this didn't have to end? What if you could have this life permanently?" Eleanor stared at him, hardly daring to breathe. "Sebastian, what are you saying?" Sebastian set down his champagne and moved closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "I'm saying that these past weeks have changed everything for me. You have changed everything for me." Eleanor felt the world tilt around her. "I don't understand." "I'm saying," Sebastian continued, his voice low and intense, "that I have fallen in love with you, Eleanor Hartwell. Not with the elegant lady in the emerald gown, but with the woman who creates beauty that will outlast us all, who speaks passionately about roses and maintains her dignity no matter what circumstances she faces." Eleanor's champagne glass slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the stones. "Sebastian, you cannot mean—" "I mean every word," Sebastian said, reaching for her hands. "Marry me, Eleanor. Be my wife, my countess. Let me give you back the life you lost, and more besides." Eleanor looked into his face, seeing sincerity and passion, and what looked very much like love. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine it. A life as Sebastian's wife, mistress of Worthington Manor, secure and cherished and loved. But even as her heart soared, a small voice whispered doubt. Why now? Why tonight? Something flickered in Sebastian's expression. Was it guilt? Does it matter? "I know my own heart, Eleanor. I love you." Eleanor studied his face, searching for something she couldn't name. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility and unspoken questions. Before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the evening air like a blade. "Well, well, Ashworth, I see your project has succeeded admirably." They turned to see James Fitzwilliam approaching, slightly drunk, and wearing a knowing smirk that made Eleanor's blood run cold. "Fitzwilliam," Sebastian said sharply, "you should return to the house." "Oh, but I couldn't miss this touching scene," James continued, oblivious to Sebastian's warning tone. "Our little country mouse has certainly cleaned up well. I must say you've earned your victory quite thoroughly, though I confess I'm rather tempted to make a counteroffer myself." Eleanor felt the first cold finger of dread. "Victory?" "James, stop," Sebastian commanded, but his friend was beyond hearing. 6 weeks to transform a servant into a lady convincing enough to fool society, and here you are, proposing marriage on the very night of your triumph. Brilliant strategy, truly. Though I suppose the proposal ensures you win the wager completely. The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. "Wager?" Sebastian's face had gone ashen. "Eleanor, let me explain." "What wager?" Eleanor's voice was deadly quiet. James, finally sensing the danger, tried to retreat. "I say, perhaps I've spoken out of turn." "What wager?" Eleanor's voice rose to a shout that echoed across the garden. Sebastian reached for her, desperation clear in his face. "Eleanor, please, it's not what you think." "Tell me about the wager, Sebastian." Eleanor stepped back from his reaching hands, her voice like ice. "Tell me exactly what you and your friend bet on." Sebastian's shoulders sagged in defeat. After Miss Pemberton's rejection, James wagered that I couldn't make someone like you fall in love with me. The stakes were my gambling debts if I succeeded in transforming you and presenting you tonight. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Someone like me? A servant? A nobody? Someone so beneath your notice that transforming her would be a noteworthy accomplishment. Eleanor, that's not. And what did you stand to win by making me fall in love with you? Eleanor's eyes blazed with fury and hurt. How much were your gambling debts worth, Sebastian? Sebastian flinched as if she'd struck him. It wasn't about the money. Eleanor, I fell in love with you. When? Eleanor interrupted. When exactly did you fall in love with me? Before you proposed this masquerade, or after you saw how well I could play the part you created? Sebastian opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again, realizing with horror that he couldn't pinpoint when his feelings had become genuine. Eleanor saw the uncertainty in his face and nodded with bitter satisfaction. You don't even know, do you? You cannot separate your feelings for me from your pride in your own accomplishment. Eleanor, I love you. You love your success, Eleanor corrected coldly. You love that you won your wager, the ultimate transformation, turning a servant into a countess willing to marry you. Tears were streaming down her cheeks now, though her voice remained steady. Did you laugh about it with your friend? Compare notes on my progress? Discuss whether I was sufficiently transformed to win your bet? Actually, James interjected with cruel amusement, he called you remarkably malleable just last week. James! Sebastian turned on his friend with fury. What? She was... James shrugged, said she believed every word. No, Sebastian said desperately. Eleanor, I know how this sounds, but I swear to you, I fell in love with you. The wager became meaningless. Eleanor's laugh was bitter. You told me every living thing deserves a chance to bloom. I did. And you uprooted me for sport. The words hit Sebastian like a physical blow. The echo of his own philosophy turned against him. Eleanor wiped her tears with the back of her hand, leaving streaks on her carefully applied cosmetics. I thank you for the lovely evening, my lord. Your experiment has been a complete success. You have proven that you can indeed transform a servant into a lady convincing enough to fool society, and foolish enough to believe in your affections. Eleanor, please. I shall return to my proper place in the morning, Eleanor continued as if he hadn't spoken. I trust you will say nothing of this unfortunate lapse to Mrs. Henderson. I should hate to lose my position over my foolishness in believing your kindness was genuine. With that, she turned and walked away, her emerald skirts rustling softly on the terrace stones. Sebastian watched her go, wanting desperately to call after her, but knowing that anything he said would only make matters worse. Eleanor disappeared into the house, leaving Sebastian alone with the shattered remains of his victory. He had won his wager, proven his abilities, and in the process had lost something infinitely more valuable. He had lost Eleanor, and the taste of triumph had turned to ash in his mouth. Eleanor woke before dawn in her small servant's room, her eyes swollen from crying, but her resolve firm as steel. The emerald gown hung in her wardrobe like a beautiful lie, a reminder of the most magical and devastating evening of her life. She dressed in her familiar brown work dress, pinned her hair back severely, and made her way to the rose garden as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The roses she had tended with such care now seemed to mock her with their beauty. They too had been part of Sebastian's elaborate deception. Mrs. Henderson found her there an hour later, working with mechanical precision among the flower beds. "My dear," the older woman said gently, "Lord Ashworth has asked to see you in the library." Eleanor didn't look up from her pruning. "Please tell his lordship that I have nothing further to say to him." "Eleanor, please, Mrs. Henderson, I will not see him." The housekeeper studied Eleanor's face with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "What happened last night, child?" Eleanor's composure cracked for just a moment. "I remembered my place, ma'am, that's all." For the next 3 days, Eleanor avoided Sebastian completely, throwing herself into her garden work with fierce determination. She heard from the other servants that he had tried several times to speak with her, but she remained resolute. What could he possibly say that would undo the humiliation of learning she had been nothing more than a wager? On the 4th morning, Mrs. Henderson appeared again in the garden, this time carrying an official-looking letter. "This came for you, dear, from London." Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a formal offer of employment as head gardener for Lord Pemberton's estate, along with a cottage and wages that would make her independent for the first time since her father's death. "Lord Pemberton was quite impressed with your knowledge at the garden party," Mrs. Henderson explained. "He made inquiries and learned of your situation. This is a genuine offer, Eleanor, a chance for a new beginning." Eleanor stared at the letter, tears blurring her vision. A way out. A chance to leave behind the humiliation and heartbreak, to build a life based on her own merits rather than anyone's charity or deception. "There's something else," Mrs. Henderson continued softly. "Lord Ashworth is leaving for London this afternoon. Indefinitely, he says." Eleanor looked up sharply. "Leaving? He seems different since the garden party. Quite broken, if you ask me. Whatever happened between you two, it's destroyed him as much as it has you." Eleanor turned away, not wanting Mrs. Henderson to see the conflict in her face. Part of her, the part that had fallen in love with Sebastian despite everything, wanted to run to him, to see if there was anything real left between them. But the larger part, the part that had been wounded beyond bearing, knew that trust once broken could never be fully repaired. "I'll take Lord Pemberton's offer," she said quietly. "When can I leave?" "Whenever you're ready, dear. Though perhaps you should speak with Lord Ashworth before he goes. Some things are better said than left to fester." Eleanor shook her head firmly. "There's nothing left to say." But as she watched Sebastian's carriage disappear down the drive that afternoon, Eleanor felt a piece of her heart break away and go with him. Love, she realized, was not so easily dismissed. Even love built on lies. The gardens at Pemberton Hall were the finest in Hampshire, and Eleanor Hartwell was acknowledged as their architect. She had found peace in her new life, respect, independence, and the satisfaction of work well done. Lord Pemberton treated her with genuine appreciation, and she had even begun to form friendships among the local gentry who valued her expertise. Her secret rose, Eleanor's Grace, grew in a place of honour in her new garden, more magnificent than ever. Yet sometimes, in the quiet evening hours when she walked among her roses, Eleanor found herself thinking of another garden and another time when she had believed in fairy tales. It was on such an evening that her maid brought word of a visitor. "There's a gentleman to see you, miss. Says his name is Lord Ashworth." Eleanor's heart stopped. After a year of silence, what could Sebastian possibly want? She found him waiting in the small parlour of her cottage, looking thinner than she remembered, and older, though no less handsome. He rose when she entered, his eyes drinking in the sight of her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite everything. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "you look well." "As do you," she replied, though it wasn't entirely true. There were shadows under his eyes and a weariness in his bearing that spoke of sleepless nights. "What brings you to Hampshire, my lord?" Sebastian winced at the formal address. "I came to see you, to apologise properly and to tell you something I should have said a year ago." Eleanor remained standing, her hands clasped tightly before her. "I don't think—" "Please," Sebastian interrupted. "Just let me say what I came to say. Then I'll leave, if that's what you wish." Eleanor nodded reluctantly. Sebastian took a deep breath. "You were right about everything. The wager, my motives, my inability to separate my feelings from my pride. I was a fool and a coward, and I hurt you in ways I can never forgive myself for." Eleanor said nothing, waiting. "But you were wrong about one thing," Sebastian continued. "I did fall in love with you, completely, utterly, irrevocably. It happened so gradually I didn't recognize it at first, but I know exactly when I knew for certain." Despite herself, Eleanor found herself curious. "When?" "During our coaching sessions, when you questioned the very foundations of social interaction. When you made me examine my own assumptions about how people should behave toward one another. That's when I realized I wasn't just attracted to my creation, but to the woman who had the courage to challenge me." Eleanor felt tears threaten, but kept her voice steady. "Yet you still continued with the wager." "Yes," Sebastian admitted, "because I was a coward who was afraid to court you honestly, afraid you might reject me for who I truly was, rather than for what I could offer you. The wager gave me an excuse to spend time with you, to woo you without risking genuine rejection." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I know it's no excuse. I know I betrayed your trust in the worst possible way, but I needed you to know that what I felt for you was real, even if my methods were despicable." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Why now? Why come here after all this time? Sebastian's smile was sad and self-deprecating. "Because I've spent a year in London society, surrounded by eligible young ladies who possess all the proper qualifications for a countess. And every one of them left me cold because none of them were you." Eleanor felt her heart lurch, but she steeled herself against the pull of old emotions. "Sebastian!" "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," he said quickly. "I know I don't deserve it. I'm not even asking for another chance, though God knows I want one. I just needed you to know that you were never a wager to me. You were never a project or an experiment. You were the first real thing I'd ever felt, and losing you was the price of my own stupidity and pride." Eleanor felt a tear slide down her cheek despite her best efforts. "You can't just say these things and expect—" "I expect nothing," Sebastian said quietly. "I hope, but I expect nothing. I know you have a good life here, that you're valued and respected as you always should have been. I would never ask you to give that up for someone who proved himself so unworthy of your trust." He moved toward the door, then paused. "There's something else. I had this made for you." He handed her a small wrapped package. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened it to reveal a pressed flower mounted in a delicate frame, a perfect bloom of Eleanor's grace, preserved forever. "I saved it from that last day," Sebastian said quietly, "before you left Worthington Manor. I needed something to remember you by, but I think it belongs with you." Eleanor stared at the pressed rose, tears flowing freely now. "You remembered." "I remembered everything," Sebastian said softly. "Every word, every smile, every moment you showed me what real beauty looked like. You were never the project, Eleanor. You were the root, the bloom, the whole garden of everything good I never knew I was missing." With that, he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone with her tears and the preserved rose that had once been her secret. Outside, Sebastian paused by his carriage, looking back at the cottage where light glowed warmly in the windows. He had said what he came to say, done what honor demanded. Now the choice was Eleanor's. As he drove away into the gathering dusk, Sebastian allowed himself to hope that love, real love, honest love, might find a way to bridge the chasm his own foolishness had created. 3 days later, Eleanor walked into her garden and stopped in wonder. There, Planted beside the path where she would see it every morning was a new rose bush bearing a small brass plaque. Eleanor's Grace, bred by Miss Eleanor Hartwell, the finest gardener in all England. Beside it lay a note in Sebastian's familiar hand. Some things deserve to be acknowledged. Your gift to the world should bear your name. Eleanor knelt beside the rose, touching its petals gently. Perhaps some fairy tales were worth believing in after all. Perhaps some flowers, once uprooted, could indeed bloom again. She looked toward the horizon where Sebastian's carriage had disappeared 3 days before, and for the first time in a year, Eleanor smiled with genuine hope.